It's a very warm welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of Arab Affairs, our program bringing you all the latest news and events from all over the Arab region. I'm Angie Meher joining you for today's episode, and as usual we begin straight away with a look at some of the news making the headlines, and starting with the latest situation in Damascus that said on Saturday that the U.S. occupation of Syrian territory could not continue after Washington carried out deadly strikes in retaliation for a drone attack that killed 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan. Syrian military also said in a statement that the overnight strikes killed a number of civilians and soldiers and wounded others, causing significant damage to property. We have more details in this story.
The U.S. military launched airstrikes in Iraq and Syria against more than 85 targets linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guard and the militias it backs, in retaliation for last weekend's attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. troops. The strikes, which included the use of long-range B-1 bombers flown from the U.S., were the first in a multi-tiered response by President Joe Biden's administration to the attack by the Iran-backed militants, and more U.S. military operations were expected in the coming days. Whilst the strikes did not target sites inside Iran, they signaled a further escalation of conflict in the Middle East from Israel's nearly 4-month-old war in Gaza. The U.S. military said in a statement the strikes hit targets including command and control centers, rockets, missiles and drone storage facilities, as well as logistics and munitions supply chain facilities. Damascus said Saturday that U.S. occupation of Syrian territory cannot continue after Washington carried out the deadly strikes in retaliation for a drone attack that killed 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan. The Syrian military said in a statement that the overnight strikes killed a number of civilians and soldiers, wounded others, and caused significant damage to public and private property. Syrian Foreign Ministry said the strikes served to inflame the conflict in the Middle East in an extremely dangerous way and added to the U.S. record of violations of Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammad Shia Sudani's office also said on Saturday that 16 people were killed, among them civilians, and 25 injured in the overnight U.S. strikes on the pro-Iran targets in Iraq. In a statement, it condemned the strikes as a new aggression against Iraq's sovereignty and denied that they were coordinated by the Baghdad government beforehand with Washington, calling such assertions lies.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by His Excellency Ambassador Ayman Mosharafa, the former Assistant to Foreign Minister. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador.
To the audience.
Mr. Ambassador, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for your time and for joining us this afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. And of course, we've seen the latest development with regard to the U.S. airstrikes in Iraq that have killed 16 civilians in retaliation to the drone attack that killed 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan, and as well as the strikes in Syria as well. Mr. Ambassador, how do you see this latest response by the United States?
The American response was actually in response to the drone attack against an American base in north of Jordan near the Syrian border,
yes,
which caused the killing of 3 American soldiers and several injuries. President Biden promised a swift and an immediate response to this attack and accused Iran and the fellow allies of Iran in the Middle East, non-state actor, of course, to be behind this murderous attack.
How do you see, Your Excellency, the response as well by the American administration justifying this attack, and how, they are saying that this was a simple attack to avenge the U.S. soldiers killed in Jordan?
First, I have three things.
Yes.
First, the American attack was in two sovereign states,
Yes.
Iraq and Syria, in 8 different locations in the north of Syria, east of Syria, and the north of Iraq.
Yes.
Against Al-Hashd al-Shabi and several allies of Iran, which caused civilian casualty. And this attack too was out of the international legality. That means usually, according to international law and the UN Charter, they should have a Security Council resolution to be able to go after certain targets in sovereign countries, which was not done. And in the same time, it was against non-state actors. Most of the Al-Hashd al-Shabi or other organizations are non-state actors. They are not. The state of Iraq and the state of Syria is not directly responsible about those attacks because they do not control those areas or the whole Iraqi and Syrian territory. So it's putting in jeopardy civilian targets and civilian life.
Absolutely.
And it's becoming actually a way of retaliation done by the American or by the state of Israel in attacking Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and other targets in the Middle East, out of the international legality.
Indeed, Mr. Ambassador. Now, we've seen the Syrian Foreign Ministry saying the strikes have served to inflame the conflict in the Middle East in a rather dangerous manner. How do you see this response, especially with the situation in the Middle East already quite dire?
You know, actually, we are living in a narco crisis. We have a civilian. We have problem in Yemen. There is constant attacks by the Houthis on the international navigation in the Red Sea and Bab al-Mandab, and we have a problem in Lebanon due to the scuffle between the Israeli forces and Hezbollah, and you had problems in Iraq and Iran, in Iraq and Syria, which is suffering actually from chaos, and the situation is very, very, precarious in those countries due that the national state have collapsed and could not control over the territory. We want de-escalation of the tension, not escalation. But what happened, it is an escalation of the tension and could bring a vicious circle of retaliation after retaliation.
Indeed.
And it could spin out of control to flood the Middle East of blood and this vicious circle, as I said, of retaliation between the American and the non-state actor.
Absolutely. Right, Mr. Ambassador, to look at some of the responses, we've seen Britain, calling the U.S. its steadfast ally on Saturday, saying it supports Washington's right to respond to attacks after the U.S. military launched the airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. How do you see the British government's response to the U.S. attacks?
The British government was the logical response because the UK is ally, is a natural ally of the US all over history, and there is this very thin partition between UK and US. So I mean, it's quite normal that the Prime Minister and the UK would support the United States of America against any action that the United States is taking against the non-state actors or an act of retaliation.
Indeed.
So I'm not surprised by the British action. Actually, it was quite natural.
Indeed. Do you expect further attacks by the U.S. administration?
I think not in the time being, because actually they have a bank of targets and around 80 targets. And they already maybe realized what they want. If there is a further action or retaliation, I think the American will retaliate again.
Right.
And we will, as I said, we will be flooded in a vicious circle of retaliation after retaliation.
Absolutely right. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Ayman Mosharafa, former assistant to the Foreign Minister. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and your insight, and for joining us on today's edition of Arab Affairs. And continuing with our news, still with the region, moving to Gaza. Israel pressed its blistering assault on the Strip on Saturday as fears grew of a push into the southern city Rafah, teeming with civilians uprooted by the nearly 4-month-old war. The Palestinian Health Ministry said Saturday at least 27,238 Palestinians had been killed and over 66,500 others injured in Israeli strikes on the Gaza Strip since October 7th. We have more details in this report.
Israel pressed its blistering assault on the Gaza Strip on Saturday as fears grew of a push into Rafah, the southern city teeming with civilians uprooted by the nearly 4-month war. 19 Palestinians, most of them women and children, were killed in the 120th day of Israeli aggression on Gaza. Medical sources also reported the death of 18 others in Israeli airstrikes on 3 homes in Deir al-Balah, Rafah central and southern of the Gaza Strip. Palestinian was shot dead in a Nasr neighborhood in Gaza, and scores were detained in Tal al-Hawa. Occupation forces said they also destroyed a number of residential blocks. Meanwhile, Al-Amal hospital blockade continued in Khan Yunis. Constant barrage of airstrikes and tank fire rocked the area during the night, according to a journalist of the main city in southern Gaza. It has been the focus of the Israeli offensive. Palestinian Health Ministry said Saturday at least 27,238 Palestinians have been killed and 66,452 injured in Israeli strikes on the Gaza Strip since October 7th. It added in a statement that Israeli forces killed at least 107 Palestinians and injured 165 over the last 24 hours. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians displaced by the fierce fighting have fled south to Rafah since the outbreak of the war, with their tents cramming spaces along streets and in parks. World Health Organization said the city, that had been home to 200,000 people, now hosts more than half of Gaza's 2.4 million population. Meanwhile, Egypt continues its efforts to guarantee the speed access of humanitarian aid to Gaza via the Rafah border crossing.
على عهدي على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني موطني موطني الجلال والجمال والسناء والبهاء